So I know HBOMBERGUY did an in-depth feature-length production on this topic, but listen, you're not here for prime rib. You're here because it's 3 a.m. and everywhere but Denny's is closed, and you want a Grand Slam plate before a Grand Slam handy behind the dumpsters. I get it. I don't think the origins of RWBY and its creators needs to be explained. And people much more knowledgeable on the topic have discussed that at length already. I'm here because nearly 10 years after release, I finally sat down and watched Volume 1 in a single sitting, no less. And, well, I've got some thoughts. I can usually separate pieces of media into 3 simple Venn diagram categories. I love this, I hate this, or I can appreciate it, but it's not for me. Usually, it's a fairly cut and dry experience for me of what goes where. Sometimes there are weird franchises that find themselves between categories. A great example is Warhammer 40k. For my own taste, I think it's ugly to look at. The universe in it is bleak beyond measure, and yet the Inquisitor Martyr game and those 20,000 word essays you call wiki pages somehow still pull me in, cementing itself squarely between all 3 categories. Incidentally, RWBY is somewhere between those first 2 categories of love and hate. From here, we'll take a look at what I loved, what I hated, and a couple of things that feel flat. So what are the things I loved about Volume 1? What did I hate about it? And lastly, what are some things that even though I can be forgiving on, still felt a little bit flat? We're gonna spend the rest of this video exploring each of those one by one. Now, you may already know this if you've followed me on Twitch for a while, or you've maybe picked it up from a few of the VODs that I posted on this channel in the past, but I played bass guitar for a little over a decade when I was younger and dabbled with a couple other instruments, but I found a home in the local music scene, and I played a bit of punk, a bit of hardcore, a little bit of metalcore, and from probably the time I was around 14, bands like AFI, Killswitch Engage, 9 Inch Nails, Black Dahlia Murder, and, a number of others all helped shape an extremely edgy taste in music for years to come. The moment that RWBY unsheaths her scythe as the music transitions from headphones to the audience's ears, in an instant, I traveled back in time to being a rebellious teenage girl who had yet to shred her vocal cords and suffer various head injuries due to mosh-related accidents. The soundtrack itself was composed by Jeff Williams, featuring his daughter Casey doing most of the vocals for the songs we get through the volume. The man didn't have to go this hard, but he did it for us. The 2 songs I liked the most were This'll Be the Day, which would become the intro for our season, followed by I May Fall. And I don't know how to tell you this, but they both fucking slap. Likewise, multiple other singles can be heard in the credits of following episodes throughout the volume. The lyrics are simple, charming, and probably feel relatable for anyone that feels vulnerable or frustrated. Plus, we've all had that band or song that half the enjoyment of them is annoying an adult in our life.
What is this garbage you're watching? I want to watch the news. This is the news.
Side note, even though I only watched Volume 1 so far, I had a playlist of RWBY songs from later volumes playing on YouTube, and there are some fucking bangers in there. Although there are several standards that many reviewers agree help make for memorable or effective character design, tastes and aesthetics are extremely subjective, including my own. The characters in RWBY are obviously anime in design, which admittedly is a plus in my book. Please enjoy this informative image illustrating the bar I set for my own tastes. But you may ask yourself, why do the characters in RWBY appeal to me? If you Google what makes for good character design, you will get 1.21 billion hits. Obviously, we as distinguished Netscape navigators are only going to take the first 3 or 4 results seriously, which is fine because the first 2 results broke things down into 3 great categories. Those 2 sources, Studio Binder and the Nashville Film Institute, listed 3 categories for effective character design: silhouette, palette, and exaggeration. Silhouette is defined as stripping away nearly all color or defining details and still being able to identify the characters for who they are. Interestingly enough, one of the promotional images for RWBY did nearly just that, leaving all but the hair colors black. It's a really cool way of setting up the fairy tale aesthetic that helped inspire each of these characters, as well as a neat way to promote it in general. I'd be willing to bet that even if you haven't seen the show, if you've had any amount of osmosis via a fan, you could safely guess this is Team RWBY. Palette is how color is used in regards to the character. Ideally, using a simple palette with a hierarchy of colors tend to make our brain receptors go, while too many colors can compete for your eye's attention and tend to distract from the character's actual design. Team RWBY excels in the use of color. Each girl has 2 primary colors with a tertiary color or 2 as an accent. RWBY has black and reds with a whitish rose on her belt. Weiss has white and blue with red accents. Blake, black and white with a purple ombre in her leggings. Lastly, Yang with a brown, yellow, and black palette. These are all simple contrasts that can give characters a very memorable design. Lastly, and I think what some of us might argue is most important, is exaggeration. These are the defining physical traits that can help us tell, is this a hero or a villain? A main character or just another face in the crowd? Do they feel familiar or alienating? Here's where I'll admit, even if I really like their designs, anyone that's played a single JRPG or seen most shonen anime will tell you these are protagonists without a doubt. In contrast to their appearance, you've got a villain that resembles the main character of A Clockwork Orange that's the primary identifiable villain thus far. RWBY's visual cues are also a bit on the nose. And by a bit, I mean anyone that's not significant is literally a black outline. Even if you haven't watched many animes or played many JRPGs, the visual narrative frames them as being the significant focus in each character's establishing shots. John Badman and his merry band of clockwork goons are very clearly robbing the dust store. And you're gonna tell me you didn't think the girl with the fucking cape who throws a grown-ass man through a window is the main character? Although I will say, it does feel a little bit generic. But you know what? That's the thing. Generic doesn't inherently mean bad. Sure, it may not always be unique, but sometimes we seek generic designs because it's familiar, and often familiar can be easier to digest. Bandai Namco, for example, makes some extremely generic anime games, in my opinion, but their aesthetics and palettes I still find myself enjoying. I found the designs of Team RWBY, as well as the increasing background cast, to be extremely effective at being eye-catching and aesthetically appealing to my own preferences. Except Jean and Cardin. Boring-ass mother... Out of curiosity, I searched RWBY on the site TV Tropes to see what it had to say about the series. There are so many tropes that they can't be shown on a single page, so it has to be broken down into 13 sub-pages, 8 of which are in an alphabetical sorting, with the other 5 consisting of fairy tale motifs, foreshadowing, mythical motifs, ship tease, and shoutout. This is only mildly relevant to what I want to say here, and more so something I found funny. RWBY definitely has its tropes, but it's also 8 shoutouts in a trench coat trying to buy a copy of the Cowboy Bebop box set at a secondhand shop that smells like BO and cigarettes. Battle School? Check. Special powers that are especially unique to the primary team? Check. Unique designs that visually differentiate each team? Check. Mysterious shadow organization constantly doing bad things behind the scene? You bet your ass. None of these things are particularly special on their own. Because everything is derivative, I think it's fine. These basic tropes have been done many times before, have been used since, and will continue to be used going forward. The writing. Holy shit, the writing. They had so many great ideas. How could they fumble it this hard? Look, the series has plenty to explore. The dust, the grim, semblances, anything but self-inserts like John. In fact, here's why Jean as a character bugs me so much in Volume 1. Shouldn't a hunter from a long line of famous warriors...
My father, my grandfather, and his father before him were all warriors. They were all heroes. I wanted to be one too.
know literally anything about how the semblances, auras, and grim work? The show is called RWBY, and literally named after the primary team, yet half of Volume 1 is about Jean. I would care a lot less about that fact if the episodes were longer and made a fair amount of time for both things. Hera already has strong shoulders. Why does she need to keep strengthening them by carrying John? Hera doesn't get to have the full moment of revealing her semblance for herself.
What? How did you...
Well, RWBY has her speed. You have your glyphs. My semblance is polarity.
It's lost on helping out Jean, who has once more gotten himself in over his head with the help of the character I like less, Carden. Okay, yes, I get it. Jean's purpose is to help the audience understand some of the mechanics of their powers, as well as the general lore of the world. The problem is, a good story doesn't necessarily have to tell you these things. It can show them. Does telling an audience automatically make the writing bad? Well, no. But it's the way they go about things that makes it bad. I think a lot of it could have been done better. But as much as I have issues with that, a few scenes during and after bother me a bit more. The racism against Faunus and how it's handled is certainly something. The main cast and friends witness Carden physically assaulting Velvet in the cafeteria.
Jean, cuts!
Please stop.
I told you it was real.
What a freak.
None of our heroes bother to step in, and we get a short Family Guy-style cutaway to times Carden bullied Jean. Blake, who, understandably so, is visibly uncomfortable as she has yet to reveal she's Faunus, looks on at the rest. And the final line of the scene from Yang is...
It must be hard to be a Faunus.
I kind of had to pause for a moment after that one. There's already a lot to unpack here, and our only audible dialogue response at the end of this is...
It must be hard to be a Faunus.
I mean, I guess it's something that we get this acknowledgement at least, but I don't know. It's been solidly established, both in class lectures and news reports, that currently civil rights protests are occurring, as well as terrorism against Shani Dust Company. because people are still being oppressed by cultural and systemic racism and oppression. There is so much potential to discuss not just racism, but discrimination in general. Instead, we get Weiss complaining that Daddy is angry because his mega corporation lost profits.
And every day, my father would come home furious. And that made for a very difficult childhood.
And had labor strikes that interfered with production and profits, and that striking back against discrimination and mediocre wages, if any wages at all, isn't very nice. Maybe I interpreted the scene incorrectly, but why am I, a worker in 2023, supposed to give a shit about that? If you're part of the system that allows for the oppression of an entire subset of people based off their ethnicity, you can't be shocked when they, wait, let me check my notes.
Well, maybe we were just tired of being pushed around.
Oh yeah, that's right. Fight back. Please enjoy this informative graphic comparing Weiss and Blake. Blake, immediately after revealing herself as a former member of White Fang, runs away and takes off her bow for the big reveal we kinda all figured was coming. Although the writing of this arc feels messy and leaves a lot to be desired, the characters I'm most sympathetic for are Blake and Velvet, which I sincerely hope was the objective. A friend told me they see Blake's writing and characterization as poorly done, considering some of her background we've been given contrasts the defining moment of silence in the lunchroom in response to Cardin's bullying of Velvet. They felt like Blake's character would have said or done something having been a former White Fang. And yeah, I think it is a valid point to discuss, but I think Blake's silence isn't that unrealistic of a reaction either. The White Fangs are now officially considered a terrorist organization. Faunus are openly discriminated against by people like Cardin, and in the latter's case are likely to face physical and verbal assault. And if her full identity is revealed, considering her past, she could potentially face legal consequences ranging from expulsion to arrest due to her past involvement against Schnee Dust Company. Something we should perhaps consider, though, is that minorities, whether they be people of color, LGBTQ+, or both, have often found themselves in a position of, do I stand up and say something and face immediate backlash? Or do I sit quietly to protect myself? Sometimes I think we forget that being able to speak out is a privilege in its own right, because oftentimes those in vulnerable communities lack the ability to do so. What's more, if you've ever known activists engaged in what is considered more extreme forms of protest, it is not uncommon to avoid attention in their day-to-day life. Even general protests, you can find flyers or forms of etiquette that outline general tips for protecting the identities of others to prevent legal or social ramifications. Obviously, there are outliers who've embraced their role in these organizations or positions, but not everyone has to fit that role. While I think it's great they wanted to achieve a dialogue about problems of racism and discrimination, I feel they just handle it so poorly between the RWBY gangs and Pyrrha's reactions to Cardin and weak response subsequently to Weiss's verbal diarrhea. The following is a bit more subjective, but it's one of my pet peeves about dialogue in some media. I kind of want to blame Joss Whedon and some of his content for it, but I'm kind of sick of the incessant need that some shows have to prevent scenes from being too heavy by having to throw in a witty zinger.
It's like a force field!
Yes, if you want to look at it that way.
She does like tuna a lot.
Pyrrha, I know I'm going through a hard time right now, but I'm not that depressed. I can always be a farmer or something.
No!
It's not to say I dislike the humor of the show either. There's a few moments and jokes I found quite endearing or that really made me smile.
Think you can make the shot?
Can I?
Of course I can!
My semblance is polarity.
Oh, you can control poles.
No, you dunce. It means she has control over magnetism.
I'm just exhausted of the juxtaposition of humor to every serious moment. During the early series, it's understandable why the runtime is short. It's a web animation by a small team with limited time, budget, and resources, especially when you consider they were also involved with Red versus Blue at the time. My problems with the episode length falls into two issues. Number one, if an episode is going to be 5-ish minutes or even less, probably don't put in an intro that eats up your already extremely limited time for narrative or action. Episode 5 is literally 4 minutes and 32 seconds. A 30-second intro is 11% of your episode gone already. Secondly, this is the first season of the show. One of the most important objectives should be establishing the setting, lore, and main cast. And they kind of go halfway with that. Like, I would say they, on a bare minimum level, do set out those things. But there's so much kind of wasted time, it feels like, with banter or kind of poor explanations about what's going on. We don't find out till episode 14 that their powers are called semblances. We don't get much of an explanation to why the Dust Gang is significant, or how Grimm are still a threat despite a world full of superpowered people. It just feels like more thought could have gone into narrative structuring. And I know, yeah, this all kind of falls into the category of writing, but I think you could still have effectively used your time better, and I think it's why it's important to bring it up here. From my understanding, at least early on, a lot of the VAs in RWBY are either fairly or completely new to voice acting. That's totally fine, and I don't expect them to have award-winning performances right out of the gate. I think my token issue is some of the lines feel really flat, and what's more, some of the characters, they feel like someone's idea of how a teenager sounds, and not just in the written dialogue of what they say. Which, all of this doesn't really fall on the voice actors so much as it does the production team. And if they've been given both proper feedback on their lines as well as any direction to begin with. Here is a handful of examples that stood out to me in regards to this.
Yang? Is that you?
Oh, hey, sis!
What are you doing here?
Looks like we're gonna be doing this the hard way.
Well, the name's Jeanne Arc. Short, sweet, rolls off the tongue. Ladies love it.
Do they?
They will. Well, I hope they will.
That being said, the first person you make eye contact with after landing will be your partner for the next 4 years.
Aura is the manifestation of our soul. What do you mean?
Quick, we have to observe him!
I mentioned in the trope segment that I like a lot of the things RWBY uses as far as tropes go. While I won't say that any part of the production of a series is easy, I will say that a battle school or combat academy with young adults with superpowers is a pretty reliable backdrop for a lot of stories. It's a formula that's easy to sell to the audience and continues to sell in the market. I think the problem is that there are other series that, for my money, do it better. A few examples I can think of offhand are things like, Utena, Kill la Kill, My Hero Academia, Soul Eater, etc. I think it's fine if none of the major ideas are very original. It's because the narrative wants to flip-flop between telling and showing with the world that they kind of miss the mark with both things. A lot of talented people did work on the show and brought it to life. The passion and ideas are there, the execution just feels weak. The narrative should have chosen a side and delivered so that the audience didn't need a side series to explain things as you go. But all that being said, my final summation is next, and you may be surprised to see where I fall in all of this. Having looked over RWBY Volume 1, it's kind of a mess, but you know what? I found a bit of it pretty endearing. It makes me wonder if a more experienced team with a bigger budget created RWBY, would it instead be one of the more memorable pieces of Western animation? It makes me wonder how I'll feel going forward from here on out with the rest of the series, honestly. Even with the shortcomings it does have, RWBY is a testament to what a small team can do with enough drive or passion. I'm sure more than a handful of animators, artists, voice actors, and cosplayers, as well as just various other content creators in general, were inspired to either begin or further their particular passion due to the inspiration they had from this show. Personally speaking, I think a lot of times that's more powerful than whether or not the original source of inspiration was, in an academic sense, good. Although this show came out during my college years, it's exactly the kind of story I would have obsessed about as a teen. And you know, as a teen, a lot of notable anime were there.
This shindig looks like the bomb diggity.
What'd you say?
And these series would both be inspiring to my later tastes, as well as my love of animation as a whole. And honestly, these things continue to inspire me today. Obviously, because I'm still playing a pink-haired cat girl on the internet, despite having a 9-to-5 job. All that being said, despite being 10 years late to the game, watching this was a lot of fun. And it inspired me to pick back up some of my own writing and creative ventures. Plus, someone told me there's a trans character as well as a gay ship later, so obviously I have to watch all 9 seasons now. For the love of God, please don't spoil anything. So, congratulations, you made it to the end of my first video essay / review. I really hope you've made it this far and aren't ready to, throw a tomato at me for my shit takes or opinions. More importantly, remember to like, subscribe, and tell me your own thoughts or experiences about RWBY below. If this video does well enough, I'll honestly do more videos covering the rest of the series and my reactions through the later volumes. As always, stay feral, strays.